Hello, geometry students. Today we're going to continue on with our triangle congruence proofs, but today we're introducing you another reason. And our new reason is we shorthand by saying CPCTC. And what does that stand for? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So what that really is saying is that once you prove that the triangles are congruent, well, what does it mean that triangles are congruent? That means that corresponding sides of triangles are equal, and then corresponding angles of triangles are equal or congruent. So when you say that triangles are congruent, you can then go and say that any parts of the triangles are congruent. And that's going to be by your CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so if we do this example right now, this is number 1. So we said, okay, the first thing you want to do is always write down your givens. Your givens is always going to be the first statements. So my first statement is N is the midpoint of AB. I would say AX is congruent to NY. And then I can say that NX is congruent to BY. And my reasons for all of those, why are these things true? Because it was given to me. So I only know that this is true because it was given. So those are my reasons for it being true. Then we said, okay, once you have your givens, now mark your triangle. Since we got to prove triangles congruent, we got to see how can we prove them congruent. We got to see what parts are congruent. So if my statement doesn't tell me to mark something congruent, I want to see what it implies. So the first one says N is the midpoint of AB. Well, that's not telling me that anything's congruent. But I know that if N is the midpoint, then AN has to be congruent to NB. So that's going to be my next statement. AN is congruent to NB. And again, what's my reason for saying that's true? That's the definition of a midpoint. If N is the midpoint, then it's cutting this segment in half, 2 equal parts. Well, then the next statement said that AX was congruent to NY. So I'm just marking those congruent. That's the easy one, something nice and easy to do. And then NY, or NX, I'm sorry, that looked like a Y. NX is congruent to BY. Again, I can just mark it congruent. That's what they told me. Well, now that I have 3 things marked here as congruent, now I can say that these 2 triangles are congruent. So the way I name it is important. I can name the first triangle however I want. So I'm going to say AXN is congruent to. To name the second one, I have to make sure the order matters. So A is across from the side marked with 3. That's going to be N. So N. X is from 1, Y, and N is from 2, B. So triangle AXN is congruent to triangle NYB. Corresponding parts are together. Now we know they're congruent by, that's my side, 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 because I have congruent sides only. Okay? Well, I proved that the triangles are congruent, but what they want me to prove is that angle X is congruent to angle Y. Since I know that these triangles are congruent, now I can just say that any corresponding parts are congruent. So now we can say X is congruent to Y. And why can we say that? Well, that's my CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So since I know that these triangles are congruent, the corresponding parts have to be congruent as well. And that's what CPCTC is. Okay? So now we'll do another one with CPTCC. Now this one is a little harder because they want us to say that this is bisecting it. So we're not proving that certain parts are congruent. So we are going to use our CPCTC, but we're going to have to go a step further. So again, we know we always start off with the given. And the reason why our givens is true is because it was given. Boom. And then after I do that, we said, okay, now go to your triangle and mark your triangle. What can we mark? So they told me that that D is the midpoint of AB. So D is the midpoint. Again, that didn't mark anything congruent, but since D is the midpoint, you know it's splitting that segment into two congruent parts. So my next statement can be AD is congruent to DB. Again, how do I know that's true? Definition of midpoint. It says that CA is congruent to CB. Okay, so I marked that. Now I can't say the triangles are congruent yet because I only have two pieces of information. But I know that I can mark CD congruent to itself. Since both triangles share that side, I'm going to use that reflexive side. So CD is congruent to CD. That's my reflexive property. So since I know that the triangles are sharing a side, I can say that that side is congruent to itself. And now and again, I have enough information to prove that these triangles are congruent. So that's going to be my next statement. Triangle ADC is congruent to triangle A is across from the 3. So I'll say B. D is across from the 2. So that's still going to be that D. And then the C. So triangle ADC is congruent to triangle BDC. So how do I know that's true? That's my side, side, side. Again, we just have sides marked. Now if I look, I got two more spaces to fill, but they wanted me to prove that CD is the bisector. So this segment right here is bisecting this angle. So I need to prove that this is being bisected. Well, what does it mean if CD bisects this angle? Well, if CD is bisecting this angle, that means that these two parts have to be congruent. So that's what I'm going to have to say. So my next statement is I'm going to see that angle ACD is congruent to angle BCD. Again, when I named that angle, I couldn't just name it angle C because there were more than one angle at that vertex. So I had to name it with the three letters that created it, and I had to make sure that C was in the middle. So angle ACD is congruent to angle BCD. And why do we know that's true? Well, since we just said that the triangles are congruent, we can say any parts of it is congruent. So that's my CPCTC. Since these two are corresponding angles, I can say that they're congruent. Well, now that these two are congruent, now we can say our next statement. We can say CD bisects ACB. And the reason why that's true, CD bisects angle ACB, and that's going to be our definition of bisector. Why? Because if these two are congruent, then this has to bisect it. Because this segment is making, splits this into two equal parts. Okay? So that's our video. And we just learned our new term, CPCTC.